Robert, John, what a pleasure to have you here with us this evening. Thank you so much for joining us at the museum at MFIT to talk about Robert's book, Alexander McQueen, Unseen.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Tanya. It's lovely to be here.
So let's get to it. Robert, you've had a prolific career in fashion, working with global powerhouses like Vogue and Elle, and you really entered the fashion world by chance. Would you share with us how that happened?
Sure. Actually, I did a business degree. But when I settled on photography as a path, I wanted to work for National Geographic as one of their photographers. I'd had a monthly subscription since I was a kid. And I think it was all the saturated colors of that Kodachrome 25 film and the underwater photographs of David Dubillet, the magical ephemeral moments that were captured after months of patient stalking or waiting. So it's kind of natural that my first job when I came out of London College of Printing, the LCP, was in Africa for 3 months. And I was working for a luxury safari company, photographing for their brochures and their advertising, and creating a photo library for them. But when I got back from that first job, it was pretty clear that these extended trips away weren't going to cut it with my girlfriend, Vanessa, who's now my wife and agent. So we looked at other avenues. And as I had all those big white telephoto lenses for shooting wildlife, the ones that you see at the end of the catwalk, my mother-in-law, June, suggested that I have a go at the fashion shows. And I've always been interested in fashion. I grew up next to the King's Road, which was made famous in the 1960s as a mecca for new fashion boutiques, the punks and the Teds in the 1970s, the new romantics in the 80s. And I'd been to some shows in Paris when I lived there. So June introduced me to the organizers of Graduate Fashion Week. And that's where it all started. I was hooked and fashion had me. And that is not a sex shop. That is Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren's store in the King's Road, which they launched in, I guess, the late 70s, Sex.
Yeah, the iconic 430 in King's Road, yeah.
Oh, I can't remember. Just opposite the Habitat store.
Still one of the best places in London, still.
Absolutely, yeah. It became Boy, didn't it? And now what is it? It's...
Oh my goodness, now it's World's End. So
now it's Ad Hoc, that's right.
Yeah, it's gone through so many different names.
Yeah.
Let It Rock, and I mean, just on and on and on.
The strangest thing about this store, there's another picture that was there a little bit wider, and it has a door next to it just to the left with a sign over it called Victor's. And Victor's was a restaurant which was down in the basement next to that store. And it was a really, really great little bistro place in the 70s. And my grandfather, who was probably about 75, 80 at the time, used to eat in there every day because, of course, he didn't cook for himself. He was alone. And, I can just imagine him walking past Sex to go down into Victor's and have his lunch every day. Anyway, I digress.
Added some spice to the lunch.
So John, you're a writer and a researcher, but you've found in social media a really powerful vehicle to communicate with people. Would you please talk about how Alexander McQueen, how the McQueen Vault started and what you've learned from this experience?
So, and thank you again for having me here. It's such a pleasure, especially with Robert, whose work I am an incredibly huge fan, so it's quite the honor. I think for me, the kind of the initial starting point of this whole project, to begin with McQueen Vault as an Instagram account, was I'd gone through, I'd lost a family member, and I kind of needed something to focus my attention and energies. And so I thought, okay, well, let's throw some stuff up on Instagram and see what happens. And then lo and behold, 6 to 9 months later, dazed and a couple of other online and Instagram accounts were kind of picking up on it and seeing that, you know, there was some dedication here, and you know, you had a true McQueen nerd at work doing his finest to do some deep digging. And so this community sort of kind of blossomed out of you know, seeing what would happen if you threw the stuff out there. And I had also been collecting pieces of his ever since 1996, when I saw my very first collection, which was Dante, in London. And through collecting all of these periodicals and items and shoes and clothing, it just gave me the ability to not just kind of be a fan, which I'll always be a fan, I'm quite proud of being a fan, but to dive quite deeper and understand the mythos and the ideas, the inspiration, the techniques, the community that it took to create all this around such a genius brain. And then what was so great about the account was not only did it kind of teach me these things, and I kind of furthered my own education on McQueen and fashion, but I started connecting to people like many of the McQueen creators. And it's how I met Robert and Vanessa Ferrer, and became to, you know, in this place to be able to connect not only the incredible book, but start weaving together the stories behind the scenes and how all of this beautiful work to record his legacy began. And I love this page from the book, because it's 4 different kind of takes on the catwalk of Dante, and this collection for me just instantly lit a match. It was one of those things to where you kind of feel something inside. It wasn't just like, oh, this is a great show, it's so fascinating. It was more like, what is this person talking about? The themes about war and religion, there, you know, it was something very unusual for me to see in fashion. And so, you know, seeing Kristen McMenemy there on the bottom left, and this kind of sliced and cut kind of Tudor inspired jacquard jacket, it was like, oh, this is right where I want to be. It was everything I didn't know I was looking for at the time.
And today we're here together discussing the book Alexander McQueen Unseen. And fashion curator Claire Wilcox wrote the introduction and collection texts for your book, Robert. Why did you decide to work with Claire Wilcox? And John, what do you think is the role of fashion academia in the culture of fashion? So Robert, why did you pick Claire?
Well, I'm sure many of you will know that Claire's the senior fashion and textiles curator at the V&A Museum. Well, I'd done a shoot for American Vogue at the McQueen Atelier. And I'd mentioned to Sarah Burton that I had this archive of imagery, and you know, she might like to see it one day. And it turned out that they were putting the finishing touches to the book, which was going to accompany that Savage Beauty exhibition. So we had a meeting to go through and see if we could help them fill some gaps. So Vanessa and I were invited eventually to the opening of the exhibition, and that's where we first met Claire. So she not only curated this breathtaking exhibition, but she'd also edited the accompanying book. And I guess it was at that moment that we decided to go ahead with Alexander McQueen Unseen, the book. We'd been hesitating for many reasons. His legacy, it seemed so personal, and we were very respectful of his work, and we didn't want to sensationalize it. And I guess Claire, with her encyclopedic knowledge, was the perfect person to explain the collections. We wanted to be I guess, a definitive resource for students and scholars and fans of McQueen. And we didn't really just want a pretty book of my photos.
And here's Vanessa.
Oh, yes, this is my wife, and it's all down to her that this book actually came about. That's her at the exhibition, I think, clutching the Alexander McQueen book that Claire had written. And yeah, we were fortunate enough to corner her and bend her ear a little bit that night and get her on board. I think she was very, very happy to be involved as well.
She's wonderful to work with, by the way.
And my wife too.
John, what do you think the role of fashion academia is in the culture of fashion?
Well, I think as Robert was so perfectly saying, you know, these aren't just pretty books of fashion. They are recorded moments in history that influence pop culture. And it's especially critical right now in a moment of fast consumption information that we have recordings that speak to the truth and legacy of things that really happened. And that to me is super critical in what I try to do. And this image is one of the perfect examples of that Robert took backstage at Scanners in autumn winter 2003. This heavily embroidered and appliqued and pieced together kimono is actually never seen by the audience. It's in a wind tunnel on the Model I Tominagawa. And if you blink, you miss it. And, you know, if Robert hadn't have taken this picture and included this in his work, hundreds and thousands of people around the world would never have seen this. And, you know, we're talking about items, garments, pieces, creations that people spent hundreds of hours of work and detail on. So, you know, when I think about academia and the role that that plays, we're creating a support system for this legacy that will play a role in generations to come of creatives, fashion journalists, fashion students. It's not every day that you have moments like this with Deborah Shaw coming out with Impala horns coming out of her shoulders. I mean, you know, this is another picture that I picked that was quite important from It's a Jungle out there in autumn winter 1997, because you instantly see kind of all the hallmarks of McQueen on display here. And it's very, very powerful. And if these things are lost, or the kind of history and framework isn't set up around it, then we're losing critical moments in our own culture that goes beyond just mere fashion stuff.
Yes, and that is why fashion museums exist, right? Our curators are here. I think we all see a role as helping preserve the history, the memories, and give it further significance than just the shopping experience, to give an example. When I was reading your book, Robert, and this really happened to me, I was very shocked to imagine a 15-year-old knowing the significance of an apprenticeship at Savile Row. And understanding that that would give him the work experience to become a world-renowned fashion designer, and to always continue his career with this clarity of vision. I think that not everybody has that vision when they're 15 years old. And I wonder, it's a twofold question. If you had a similar vision when you were younger, or if this developed over time, but also if you saw instances of this like focused vision when you were photographing Alexander McQueen's fashion shows. If you could see how he had a tunnel vision where he wanted to get somewhere and he would just go ahead and do it.
I think from my point of view, I came to photography very late. I was probably about 23, 24. I mean, when I was 15, I did not have a clue what I wanted in my life. And I don't think most people do. I have a 16-year-old daughter, a 21-year-old son, and they're lucky to be in education. And, you know, they are getting on with their life in a very gradual way. I mean, to be 15 years old and to go out and with, as you say, that singularity of vision and map your life out to a certain degree, or understand what you want to achieve. I mean, it's, for me, if you're doing that, you're a genius. And I think we can all agree here today that Alexander McQueen was a genius. Now, in terms of his singularity of vision, I had the honor of being close to him 25 times perhaps at his shows, occasionally at parties in London. I never went to, sadly, I never went to his atelier, to his workshops whilst he was alive, and didn't witness any of that. However, when I saw him at his shows, which is perhaps the most stressful moment of a designer's career, everything they worked for 6 months is now about to be shown for the first time to the public. It's not necessarily the best way to judge anybody, but all I can say is that his head was down, he was working, he was hands-on. I don't think if a bomb went off he would have been distracted from what was happening in that backstage area. Actually, I can contradict myself slightly with that. There were a couple of instances where there was a fire backstage, and another time when the snow machine, the snow blower backfired, and the backstage was suddenly full of snow. And he reacted very, very quickly to that, of course. But honestly, the whole atmosphere backstage was work, singular vision, concentration. Not that people have fun backstage, but it wasn't fun. It was focused and focused.
Mm-hmm. I think even reacting to an emergency immediately requires a high level of focus. That you are very aware of everything that is happening around you, and you are able to offer a solution backstage.
Well, the solution was not quite what it needed to be, because there was a fire, which I noticed. I was with a friend of mine and we shouted fire, and within 2 seconds he was there, but it was an electrical fire, and he turned up with a 2-liter bottle of Coca-Cola. So my friend, who was much bigger than I was, just stood in front of him and went, "No!" and grabbed a coat and beat the fire out. But no, he was fast. He was very fast.
And you wanted to be a National Geographic photographer, and this is very interesting because it coincides with Lee McQueen's love for that magazine.
Yes.
How did you experience this mutual interest?
Well, I guess I feel that every show was an expedition into the unknown. It's hard to paint a picture of that experience. And you never knew what to expect, or indeed if you come away with anything. I mean, there were many shows that, well, not many, there were a few shows where I was turned away from backstage. I think this photograph here, Tanya, I think McQueen would have loved. It's obviously the chain mail, referencing back to the jewelry that he had in his shows, and the shark. I'm glad, actually, I wasn't the one in that suit. I'd rather be taking the photograph. But you know, at his shows, there was a visceral atmosphere. It was raw, and I often actually felt out of my element there. It was a bit like being in the jungle. But that's the experience of being there. And I think that McQueen said he was fascinated by the mechanics of nature. When you look at the fashion itself, there are so many references, as you see in this bird hat by Philip Tracy, so many references to the wild, and some of them are literal, like antelope horns that we saw earlier on, skins, baby crocodile heads coming out of shoulders, tails out of backs. It's a jungle out there. And some of them were sort of subtle amphibian prints and the jellyfish dresses in Plato's Atlantis, and use of flowers, geology, crystals in natural distinction, unnatural selection. That always gets me. And of course, you know, National Geographic wasn't just about the animals, you know, but issues that affected people and the world. And McQueen often addressed the sort of self-destructive nature of humanity. I mean, you can see here, Horn of Plenty. It screams about the wastefulness of society, humanity, and the fashion industry. And you have dresses which are seemingly made of waste materials, and this hat from a plastic bag, and some hats from tin cans. And then there was the set, which was made up of a pile of old props from previous shows, previous McQueen shows, that were painted black to look like a rubbish tip.
Oh, there they.
Amazing.
Here is Plato Atlantis that you were mentioning earlier.
Exactly.
And John, when observing McQueen's work and Robert's photographs, what is your take on all of this?
I'm glad that Robert mentioned it being kind of like a jungle-like atmosphere, because you do get the feeling sometimes that you're witnessing in his book kind of like, you know, the capturing of rare creatures, you know, in a fleeting moment, running past you to some unknown destination or destiny. And I think it really, it speaks to the power of so many McQueen moments, to where you are getting this exploration of culture, of Mother Nature, of events that are happening around the world, because he constantly, in every interview that he ever spoke with, that he would bring it back to something that was quite visceral to him, and commenting on either persecution or natural occurrences or the evolution of something. And you know, you would always hear him say that, well, Mother Nature was the absolute best designer. There's nothing better than that. So, and you see that in many of these creations. And, you know, this picture to me really stands out from the book, because again, you get something of kind of like a crystalline form captured backstage with a packet of cigarettes that would only exist in this one moment, you know, in the wild, if you will. And because this was from the Overlook, autumn winter 1999, you also get to see these rare little birds in the background, which were some of the costumes for the ice skaters. And you know, those in the show are quite hidden because of the staging and the elements of the production. So we are getting a rare glimpse inside of an episode, or of a magazine that might have only happened once. So it is, I absolutely see the parallels there. And this capture for me is almost kind of everything you want from McQueen in one picture. You get his completely genre redefining moment of extending the spine with his bumsters. And even at this point, they would have been 5 years old. Is that right? 99? Yes. Yeah. So with this insanely constructed crystal bodice that must have weighed a ton. You know, and this model, Hannelore, is just, you know, she's getting ready to go display it to the world, and I think it's quite interesting. The whole thing for me is incredibly sculptural and beautiful, because a lot of it is just based on anatomy. That's the kind of starting point of and the origin of it all. Oh, and this is quite fascinating too. Speaking of kind of rare moments caught backstage, and I've talked to Robert about this before. This crystal cane was a collaboration with Waterford Crystal, and Robert's picture of this is the only known image I've ever seen of it. And I remember posting this on Instagram once and thinking like, well, this is it. Who knows where that is now? Who knows if it's even in one piece? Who knows if it even existed outside of that moment? So again, we're brought back to this, like, like a mosquito trapped in amber for us to enjoy for just kind of like the moment that it's there. I think it's quite something.
Yeah, that speaks to the importance of pictures like this, right?
Without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have to say is, sadly, in a book, you've only got 350 pages to fill.
Right.
I think, this is, I guess, McQueen Unseen Mark I. I mean, there are so many images which, sadly, for many reasons, didn't make the cut, which, are waiting to be published somewhere else, another time, another place, maybe in an exhibition somewhere. But it's very, very difficult having to whittle down all those moments.
Yes, and there's so many people who would be interested in seeing those images and would find inspiration in them or want to do research with them.
Exactly.
And Robert, since you shot so many McQueen shows, do you have any very strong memories of all these very spectacular shows?
Absolutely. Many regrets for the ones that I didn't witness, but there you go. I guess McQueen shows were always ferocious and tender at the same time. I think you can see it in this image. Nihilism, probably 1994, I think. Is that right, John? Yeah.
That's right, yes.
And this stands out for me because it was the first of his shows that I'd photographed. I think I saw his degree show. But this was at the Bluebird Garage just around the corner from my house, which I knew it well. And the set in this show was so simple. He'd used cardboard, or not cardboard, but polyboards to make up the back wall to separate front of house from the backstage. I mean, it's the cheapest way you can do it. Painted white on one side, black on the other. We use them in photographic studios all the time. And there were a couple of rows of fold-up seats. It was all very low rent, very difficult lighting, simple but difficult. And the fashion was earthy and raw, combined with some incredible tailoring in the jackets, and with the now signature McQueen shoulders. But I'd never seen anything like it. And this cling film dress, I understand from Simon Unglis, who used to work with McQueen, possibly live with him. This cling film dress was actually wrapped on a mannequin, which they had borrowed from Central St. Martin's, and they put it out in the garden of their flat. And it was protecting it, just keeping it dry. And then come showtime, it's like, that looks interesting. Add a zip in the back, boom, look number 72. So I mean, it was, for me, it was an eye-opening show. Then there was Joan and number 13, both which had incredible finales. So in Joan, the models all wore red contact lenses, as we saw in an earlier photograph as well. I can't quite see it here. Most of the outfits were red or black. The models had these sort of bald wigs on with hyper short fringes, and the runway was like charred volcanic black. And then for the finale, this ring of fire blew up around the model, who was wearing this, this full head mask. It was, again, stunning. Number 13 was one of the other standout shows. There you go, you see the fire around. And number 13, I mean, this was a hugely emotional show, just from the sheer surprise of what happened. He had these car painting robots which came alive. They sort of sat there dormant for most of the show. And then the spectacular finale where Shalom Harlow, wearing her white dress, was sprayed black and yellow as she spun on this turntable slowly. I mean, it was performance art at its finest. Stunning moment, and I think standing ovation and many tears were probably shed by the audience. And then I guess the last one is Plato's Atlantis, just for its sheer breathtaking beauty. The prints, the shoes, it's the cover of McQueen Unseen. What more can I say?
I think in the museum, a dress from that collection might be one of our most used garments in like exhibitions, materials. We just always gravitate towards this collection as well.
I can imagine.
Yes. And John, you have said to me that you frequently go back to this book. Do you have any favorite sections in Robert's McQueen Unseen?
It is literally like a candy shop. It's quite hard to pick favorites. It's like choosing every page, I suppose, but I don't think that's anyone's surprise. This collection, which was the Black collection, which was a charity event in 2004, is featured quite heavily in the book by Robert. And it's one of my favorite sections because it wasn't a normal kind of London Fashion Week scheduled show. It was a completely separate event. And it was a bit of a greatest hits moment for him, bringing back pieces that were all created in black, or mostly created in black. So you actually get to see kind of McQueen's career up to this point. And I love that Robert chose to put this in the book because, again, and I feel like I keep on emphasizing this, where else would we be able to experience this moment? Because I wasn't in London in 2004, and pictures of it are very rarely seen. So actually, literally in this picture, you see 2004, 2003, 2002, and 2001 all kind of together in this brilliant mishmash.
I was going to add to that, John. For that particular show, I was, apart from Nick Knight, who was doing a very specific thing for Lee McQueen, I was the only photographer backstage there. So there are no other backstage photographs. I think
even better.
Yeah,
even better.
I think, you know, there are clearly runway photographs out there, but yeah, it's very strange being the only person back there with a camera. I felt quite naked, quite exposed.
Might have also been somewhat liberating too, because you probably weren't having to fight through as many people. But
of course, but that goes without saying.
This is another feature of the book that I think is quite critical, especially for fashion students, creatives, anyone. I'm a reference hoarder. So the fact that Robert and Vanessa chose to include the collection credits and kind of as a timeline in the back, I think this is so important for any fashion lover, because we get to kind of see who all's involved and what the contribution was when it happened. You get to see the evolution of his design in a snapshot. It also illustrates for me the universe of people it took to make these things happen, because McQueen truly was the center of a very elaborate spider web. But let me tell you, there were loads of key players: hair, makeup, stylists, production, jewelry designers, hat designers. It's just endless. And I love finding out all of those details. I think one of the greatest things that I love about McQueen Unseen is that through Robert's ability to capture moments backstage, it's not just, you don't just get a girl in an amazing outfit. It's not just that. You get these kind of candid snapshots of emotive episodes that kind of weave throughout all of these collections. And, Magdalena getting ready to go out in this absolutely mind-boggling outfit with Peter Phillips makeup on. It sums up kind of things that you can't describe. And I'm sure Robert would probably say this, is that you don't really get to put into word what these events happen, when you're there, when they're happening. But this is like the best thing you can have if you can't be there. And this is such an incredible moment. And I mean, of course, himself, Mr. Lee Alexander McQueen, coming out in his bunny suit, which I think they played the Pink Panther song at the end of this, when he came out. And it perfectly illustrates his cheekiness. And, so many people want to kind of associate this kind of dark romanticism with McQueen, but it really is just love. And there's lots of moments of laughter and joy and lightness and brevity. And this picture, it kind of gives me chills every time I see it, because you kind of see him perfectly beyond just seeing him.
Robert, did your perspective of Alexander McQueen change when you transitioned from runway photography to Backstage?
Absolutely. I think McQueen shows up to that point certainly stood out from anything else on the fashion calendar. And for me, they were titillating, they were shocking, they were provocative, headline grabbing, and spectacular as well. But as I went backstage, it absolutely changed the way I viewed it and the understanding of what they were all about. I mean, you can see here, this is one of the first shows where, not the first show, but one of the first shows where I actually stayed backstage for quite a long time. And you can see the whole process here of, armor going on and hair and makeup. His backstage was so different to other shows. He was totally hands-on, as I said earlier, and he was involved in everything. He was totally focused, and the same obviously was true of all his staff and the interns. Of course, I hadn't seen any of that up until this stage, really. There wasn't any idle chit-chat. They were totally dedicated to the designer and to the craftsmanship involved in the collections. And this level of detail was often repeated in the hair and makeup as well. I mean, it's a privilege to witness all of it. Here he is, this is a piece of armor, I think the arm was created by, my mind has gone blank.
Sarah Harmony?
Sarah, exactly, thank you. Sarah Harmony, exactly. And interestingly enough, the designers Sean Lean and Sarah were both, given very, very simple instructions or words, even just water or air as a guide to what they were to create for for Lee McQueen. It's fascinating stuff.
And here you can see.
Are we to the next one, or? Oh, yes. And there he is, hands-on, stitching, I think, rather than dressing, actually, you know, stitching a girl into the clothes. I mean, often there were the pieces that turned up which were, let's say, 2/3, 3/4 made. And so, you know, the backstage area would be full of busy bees stitching away frantically with 15 minutes to go.
And so for both of you, what are your favorite aspects of backstage photography? And do you have any anecdotes that you would like to share, Robert?
Me first. Okay.
Yes.
So I think favorite aspects of backstage, it's, yes, like this image, capturing those sort of unexpected juxtaposed moments. You know, in this picture, it's a bit like being on the set of a sci-fi movie and seeing all the alien extras lining up in the canteen for lunch. You know, it's those moments that pop into or pop out in front of you. And then like this, it's the opportunity to capture the clothes close up and personal. You can see all the detail, all the stitching, the textures of the fabric. I mean, you were alluding to that a little bit before, John. You know, there are sometimes you know the details on the back of the clothing. Nobody sees it on the runway because the girls might walk straight through, and you never get to see, you know, the back of the outfit. I feel backstage is a much more three-dimensional view of an outfit, and if you see it, you can shoot it. I think, yes, here we go. You know, I love the details, the shoes. I can get down on the floor. Nobody else is going to have a picture like this. Runway. And you know, the other antediluvian shoes as well, which we don't have in this presentation. But you know, when you actually see these objects close up, 12 inches away, you can actually see and feel the detail and the craftsmanship that's gone into it. But I think probably the best aspect is being able to interact with the models and create the image that you want and the image which you can't get on the catwalk. You can actually create. And you can put girls together to create these big murals as well.
Incredible.
Yeah, gorgeous.
I think there's something quite magical about when you're backstage, and it's not quite seeing behind the magician's curtain. It's more like, you know, seeing the play from the inside out, I guess, because, you know, kind of going back to what I was referring to earlier, there are legions of people that toil for limitless amounts of hours and no sleep and no food and no loved ones to make these miracles happen. This picture being a great one, the molded leather pieces from it's a, wow, my mind totally just went blank. from the chess game collection, and being able to see details like this that you might miss on the runway, but also that, you know, there are human actions that kind of take all this stuff to be brought to life. How are they packed? How are they prepared? What are the last moment details when it happens? You know, what is the process like for hair and makeup when they're getting dressed, and you know, the dressers and the seamstresses and tailors that have to do all the last minute adjustments. I mean, here you've got an entire floor full of shoes that may or may not even make it on the catwalk. But they all have a role to play in the overall story, even down to the etching and the shape of the toe or the curve of the heel. It's all so orchestrated so beautifully.
And I would argue also that it's a different understanding of fashion when you see it on the runway than when you see it backstage. You see the making, you see the creative processes in like seconds, right? When a model has to get ready to, when a model has to go out on the runway, all the different decisions that have to be made in a very short time.
So Tanya, I mean, if we went back, I don't know, 20 slides, there was an image from Pantheon ad Lucem of T.U. Quick in this huge white dress with 6 people around her, and someone right up underneath the hem of the dress, you know, sort of doing that last minute sort of sorting out of whatever was going on. And then it's kind of like the swan, this one, and the image before. So here she is 3 minutes before she goes out on the runway, with everything going on around her and all this fuss. And then there she is gliding out on the runway as if she didn't have a care in the world. But all the time underneath there's a sort of furious paddling. And for me, that's what Backstage is. It's the analogy of the swan gliding across the surface, but underneath the feet are going off in all directions just to keep it steady.
Right. And so the last image, it was actually of a makeup station.
Bag, huh?
Oh, yeah, and this, well, I just wanted to echo Robert's kind of thoughts on this, because it really speaks to the talent of someone to be able to capture moments like this in such a chaotic atmosphere. I was a makeup artist for, well, I guess technically I still am, for 16 years. And although I never worked on a McQueen show, I did New York and London, Westwood, J.W. Anderson, shows like that, where this is your reality. You are trying to create someone's vision who has worked for 6-9 months. It all comes down to 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes at the most. And, you know, as a technician, you're trying to do, you know, clown makeup like Val's station here from What a Merry-Go-Round in 2001. You're trying to execute flawless clown makeup backstage while there's about 50, 60 people running around, you know, like crazy people. And so to be able to, you know, point the lens and capture a moment like these, I think it's quite extraordinary. You get the reality of what it's like to be there. Yes, it is glamorous, but it's hard, bloody work to get things kind of to kind of come into fruition.
And I think that could be said of a book too. When we have a book in our hands, we have a polished final product, but it takes hours and years and a lot of detail and attention to go from a very general idea to the object. And we don't, as readers, get to see this whole process that Robert, Vanessa, and their team went through to put together this fantastic book, Alexander McQueen Unseen. So this is the end of our talk tonight. And at the Museum of MFIT, we're so grateful, John and Robert, for sharing your ideas, your work with us tonight.
Thank you very much, Tanya. It's a great honor to be here, and thank you for your lovely questions and for giving us the time and the space to share our creation.
And same, it's always a pleasure. I'll never avoid a moment to be able to talk about McQueen and geek out on all the details. So thank you. It's been an honor, and thank you to Robert and Vanessa as well.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure to work with you. So I hope we continue to do so.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Yeah.